Okay, good afternoon, everyone. A big warm welcome to our next live webinar in partnership with Openreach. We've got Kieran Campbell, who's our head of academy, joining us today. And today provides really an opportunity for us to discuss some of the thoughts around talent, identification, development and selection. Just in way of housekeeping, for anyone that's new to our webinars, all attendees are placed in mute, but we would certainly like to have lots of interaction during the course of the next hour. And you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A tab which you can hover over. And if you would like to sort of ask any questions during the course of the webinar, we would certainly welcome those and we'll address those. Just with regards to some of the questions we received, and I think we've been able to sort of put those on the first slide. Thank you to all those people that have contributed pre-event. Myself and Kieran have had an opportunity to go through those questions, and hopefully over the course of the, as I say, the next 60 minutes, we'll try and address some of those questions and try to do our best to answer those as best we possibly can. Big welcome to you, Kieran. It's good to catch up again. And I know, if I can sort of do a way of introduction, I think this is probably a topic that we're extremely excited about, not only as individuals, but also as an organisation. I think, it's provided a real area of focus for us with regards to our work and that crossover between rugby development from a domestic point of view and then into what you guys are doing from the performance side with your academy staff. And I think it's an area that, I suppose, has been continually evolving. There's lots of research across the globe and across a number of sports, and perhaps just an opportunity for us over the last number of weeks really to try and explore this in a little bit more detail and try and find some points of difference that can help us improve the programme that we have in place. And I think certainly you'll share my opinion that today is probably an opportunity just for us to share some of our thoughts, but also really to try and receive some feedback from some members of the public that are engaged in the game at various levels, and also challenge perhaps in some of the thinking we have as well.
Yeah, definitely, Gav. It's been something which I know we've been heavily investigating over the last few weeks. There's been some nice inferences picked up on it, I think, between both teams, between the academy and the domestic staff. And I think you're absolutely right. Everyone knows it's not an exact science, but it's something that we're trying to get better at. And I think it's another opportunity for us to hear how people can support us in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Kieran, if you're happy, maybe a good starting point, and I know it's sort of relevant to some of the questions you received, really is in our next slide, we want to really try and provide an overview of what the pathway looks like, and maybe if you can sort of provide us with a little bit of guidance around some of the terminology and some of the definitions, and then also maybe we can just discuss that relationship between the pathway and how it connects with the domestic game as well.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, if you see at the base of the pyramid there, the under 16 clubs, under 16 schools, and under 17 schools are our base of the pyramid, and that's where our players enter the program. Obviously, you'll see next to those names there's also MTS3 and PTS3. So the MTS players identify as the players who are nationally recognised, so they're guys who are heading towards national jerseys, so be it Irish under 18s, under 19s at this point, or PTS3 would be the guys who are recognised for being part of our provincial setup, who we hope are moving towards that MTS level.
Yeah.
As you move up there, you'll see them with our under 18 schools, under 18 clubs. For anyone who's external to us as well and external to Ulster, we have two streams all the way to under 18s. We have a club stream, which is very important to us as well, which takes in our players who are playing their rugby predominantly with their clubs, and our school stream, obviously, who are playing predominantly their rugby with their schools. Fortunately, those under 16 and under 17 streams now combine at under 18 level to give us two club and school teams at those age groups, allowing all our best talent to come through and play in those two teams. As you move up, then obviously you have the under 19s, and then from there you move into our sub academy or NTS1 and PTS1. So all through the pathway, opportunities for guys who are within the extended squads to come back in and achieve either PTS or NTS status, all the way up to under 19 and up towards our sub academy. And then the guys who are in that kind of core stream, who stay in that core stream depending on their performance, are in that NTS and PTS stream, which is like the, I suppose, the central pillar of the pathway. Obviously our sub academy group then is a group who are 1 year from getting into academy, and then our academy group. I think it's important to outline that although we do run a long-term individual player development plan, from when Gavin's staff and his team recognise the players under 16, is that huge opportunity for guys within extended squads to get back into the, I suppose, the NTS and PTS, as I've already described. But we also don't rule out anyone who hasn't quite made it into that system. Along, we're still looking to schools or into our clubs to make sure that guys can come out of the pathway or re-enter the pathway at different points. So hopefully that's a little bit of clarity about the pathway.
No, that's excellent, Kieran. I know it's something we're going to touch on a little bit later, is provide maybe a couple of really specific examples where, you know, that interaction where players, you know, enter the pathway or exit at various stages and the opportunity that may exist later. And I think it's really, really important. I suppose, you know, we stress, I guess, the relevance of our domestic game in terms of producing the players for the pathway and how they complement each other. And I know, you know, that's not only from a player development point of view, but perhaps, you know, some of the work around, you know, club support, volunteer recruitment or coach education, coach development. All of those things, I suppose, Kieran, work in tandem in terms of improving the game and enhancing the game, and then providing, you know, opportunities for players to have a really positive experience within the domestic game that hopefully puts them in a really good position then to enter the pathway at various stages.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's our relationships and what we've tried to build with our key stakeholders, our clubs and our schools, has been really, really important to the development of the pathway and the acceleration of player development over the last, I would say, significantly over the last 6 years. The aspects within that too is, you know, I've just said at the start, we definitely don't know it all in terms of identifying players. It isn't a pure science. Just because a player enters the pathway at 16 and we're a long-term individual model, doesn't mean that we'll necessarily see that player come all the way through to the academy. Guys enter at different points. Guys are recognised at school and club at different points and re-enter. And as I said, guys work with their stakeholders, be it their school or club, a little bit more after entering the pathway, and maybe have to come out and come back in after that support. And I know we've got examples of that later. So, you know, we've had a reasonable amount of success, I think, with guys who come into the pathway at that base of the pyramid, as we talked about. They've travelled pretty well to academy status, but there's also a lot of examples of guys who've taken different paths as they've moved through the pathway on the way through. Good,
excellent. Okay, if you're happy, Kieran, we'll maybe move on and look at, suppose, what would be the first stage in our process in terms of starting to identify some of those players that are talent. And, you know, on the next slide, perhaps we can have a little bit of a discussion around, suppose, what we would view as being some of the attributes we would want to start recognizing players, particularly at that, suppose, bottom stage of the pyramid, as you spoke about. So the players that are entering into the under 16 regional development squads, both from club and school, some of the attributes that we would want to try and see, and maybe how we've tried to construct that with a little bit more sort of user-friendly language in terms of what the player, the coach and the parent may recognise. But maybe just a good starting point, I suppose, from my point of view, is just to outline the process, Kieran, and feel free to jump in at any stage here. But I think we've got a three-pronged approach in terms of working with a 15-year-old. We place heavy value in terms of the club and school nomination, and we'll certainly hold regional forums across the province where we're having interactions with those club and school coaches, receiving their opinion on who they feel are the players that are demonstrating that level of ability or level of potential, and then how we can support that, suppose, with our staff out in the ground. So providing opportunities for us to go and view club and school games at regular intervals over the course of the season, and once again have that level of conversation with the coaches around some of those individual players. And then the last thing, suppose, is relevant is just the opportunities, and particularly within the province of Ulster, we do have players that play a range of sports, whether that's GAA, soccer, basketball, hockey, rugby, and I think we're always, suppose, have that open mind around the opportunity for late developers, either people that haven't yet achieved their potential or people that maybe come to the sport at a later date to enter the pathway. So hopefully that provides a little bit of an overview in terms of what the process looks like. Maybe Kieran, if you're happy, maybe just to touch on a couple of the strands around the particular attributes and what that might look like at a young player.
Yeah, I think this has been an interesting development. I think, Gavin, over the last period is as you said there, and I think importantly is making this document a little bit more user friendly for guys who are supporting us, in particular on identifying the players. I think one of the big things to say as well is, and it's a really important part of the process, is we're not looking for a player to have every piece of that criteria delivered at 15. We're fortunate that a lot of the guys identified by Gavin and his staff are well supported by clubs and schools, and certainly come with some of those attributes already well developed. But I think in terms of describing some of them there, I mean, you're looking at the core blocks, or the building blocks of each player in terms of what they're delivering. So skillful. I think as a province and an organisation, we're putting a lot of onus on ball transfer, so passing, a lot of onus on the core skills within their tackle. For instance, in the defensive aspect, their tackle being efficient. How good are they on their first support of a ruck clear? But I think also for those little X factor pieces as well, that really, as you've got at the end of that document, Gavin, that really help players to stand out. So we talk about those wow moments, and the guys who are able to, there's a picture actually of Robert Little there, guys like Robert who are able to deliver those offloads through the contact, or deliver a chip and chase and regather the ball. So there are core aspects, as I said, and just touched on them briefly, of ball transfer being hugely important, ball carry being hugely important. But again, we're looking for those things not to be at the top end at that point, but just to be evident, and that there's something there and a foundation to build from. I think the other thing, and we've done quite an in-depth study on this at the moment, and along with those skill factors and positional factors, just to touch on the attitude thing, is whenever we reviewed, a lot of the development of players and success of players through their development to the senior team is affected by that attitude. We call that capacity, because it's slightly different with the academy, because we're not just looking for the character at that stage, we're looking for how they learn, their capacity for taking on learning, their desire and their curious nature to want to develop really at that younger age. It's that perseverance and that determination, and just being curious about their own development is all we're looking for. Is the guy hungry to learn? Has he got a real ambition to learn? So they're just touching on some of the things briefly. When I'd say on the other two, on the rugby understanding and the physical potential, I think they're potential things at that stage. We're not expecting a 15-year-old to have a Billy Burns level of understanding of the game, or John Cooney's understanding of the game. It's just, do they have a little bit of appreciation for how to be effective in the game at that early age? And the physical potential is an interesting one, particularly as Gavin, and some of the things we've been talking about, is that the game's changing, and our philosophy in the club being built highly on collective speed, or playing flat and fast, is we are looking for different types of physical potential. Of course you need game line, and of course you need your bigger, more physical players, as you've got there in Hendy, or I suppose in a Stuart McCluskey, but there's still access points for those guys like a Michael Lowry with us, who have some of those. They are explosive, but what they have is not necessarily big men, but they have ability to use footwork or evasiveness to break the game up for us. So I think certainly on the skillful and the X factor, there's you place a lot of onus on those two things, because obviously a guy has to have a point of difference, his X factor, and the skillful thing, there has to be a foundation to build from. But there's a lot of room for movement within that rugby understanding and physical potential. So I hope I've explained that okay.
Absolutely.
Gavin?
No, that's great, Kieran. I know we've just a question in here. Somebody's asked, what age are we talking about in terms of these competencies? And just for clarity, these are the areas that we would see, suppose, as a player displaying some potential, particularly around that sort of 15 to 16 age bracket on entry into the program. And I think it's really, really important. Your point, Kieran, you've stressed is, we don't expect players to display all of these attributes, but what a document that guess hopefully enables us to do is have those informed conversations with the coaches, the players, the parents around. We think this player has something. He's demonstrating some potential. Can we have just a little bit more detail around the specific attributes that they may be displaying at that age? And then suppose what this does, Kieran, too, is provides a template which moves on to our next slide around how we would actually want to further develop some of those attributes within our program. So once again, suppose what this slide demonstrates is an example of what the actual training program would look like. A player coming into our program as an under 16, identified from the club game, and how we would sort of try and work with that player over the 2 to 3 year I guess opportunity or window of opportunity we have within that. And I think it's really, really important that suppose we start with, Kieran, is that there's really 3 strands, or the purpose of our program at that age is about improving each individual that enters the program. So if we look on an annual basis, we're probably looking at 200 plus players that come into the program from the school and club game. And certainly we feel, we have a big responsibility about enabling each of those individuals to develop and improve. We also see a big responsibility in terms of making the whole game better. So when those players go back to their club or school, hopefully what we're doing, complements the level of provision they're getting in their school and club programs as well. And suppose our ultimate goal would be that those players remain in the game, progress into the club rugby game, whether that's at All Ireland League or into a championship or regional rugby, and make that game better. But also then, suppose, as our third strand is providing, the initial opportunity for some of those players, to progress within the pathway as well. So, I think from our point of view, Kieran, suppose what we've tried to outline there is really that progression from a skill development focus through to some of the tactical strands, and how we try and support that with regards to the curriculum we deliver. And suppose what we'd want to touch on maybe is some of the important skills around those Ulster fundamentals. So we've highlighted ball movement, ball carry, tackle technique, and ball support has really been, suppose, key attributes or key skills that we would see being important, not only in today's game, but also the game of the future as well. And those would be, common themes throughout our sessions as well. So I don't know if there's anything, Kieran, you want to elaborate on there, just in terms of that progression, really from, I suppose, more of a skill or technical focus through the tactical development of the player.
I think importantly, Gavin, as you say, there is a core skills that you've just said there, and I think they're very important to also how Ulster view the game. We do have a joined up philosophy there. And as I said, very loosely, it's about collective speed. So those core skills you've talked about are hugely important. I think also with the way the game is developing, and you talk about being ahead of the game, when we get up to academy, to senior level, is I think all of us and guys listening to this are aware that the game is rapidly changing. If those core skills aren't exceptionally strong, particularly with how teams are defending now, with from an attack perspective of 13 or potentially sometimes 14 on the front line, us have to be so much greater, and our young men need to come through with really developed skills, because they're going to be under intense pressure when they get to that level. So that's hugely important, I think, and that's the only way we can move to the tactical, I think. So at that young age, that foundation we talked about earlier is hugely important. The other thing then is it allows them to explore the tactical a bit more freely, and to enjoy that aspect of it a little bit more, because they know their core skills are strong. So I think it's really important. I think the other thing you've also said there, Gavin, in terms of that is, there is a responsibility on us too, whether it's with your guys or with our guys, is to improve the individual, and ensure they have an access point and understanding and enjoyment of the game too. So their development should be something that they look forward to, and that they're seeing that it's going to make them not only a better player, but it's bringing to them also a better game which they can enjoy and hopefully stay connected to for a long time.
Absolutely, and I think that last point, Kieran, is really, really important in terms of, I suppose, our coaching philosophy there, which you've highlighted at the bottom. Is it really, we would place an emphasis in terms of developing the player through a games-based approach. As you say, we want those sessions to be really engaging, really enjoyable, but also, suppose, providing opportunities in terms of developing some of those skills under a little bit more pressure. And then, I think, as you've highlighted there, is how we can start to, suppose, informally challenge the player around some of the tactical decisions they're making within those games. And I know one of the things we're really exploring is around this idea of having some common games that we can play within those programs, and certainly roll out across the domestic game. So hopefully that slide provides an opportunity of just give us an example of where the entry point is as a 15-16-year-old, and how those guys would progress into potentially into a summer program, and then into a second year program as a 17-18-year-old as well. If you're happy, and Kieran, I think, if we move on maybe to the next stage, which is looking at what happens at that 18-year-old, and you think, you've some slides here which provides us maybe the specific example of what that would look like as an under 18 schoolboy. So when those club and school players start to come together within our pathway, how perhaps the program becomes a little bit more individual in terms of the development of those players, and some of the key information that you guys would be gathering, and also how you would go about supporting those players as well.
Yeah, so obviously some of those guys there in that picture, particularly Ben and James, have come through that lower base of the pyramid and all the way through. Ben's obviously just got into our academy this year. So in respect of that, once they are identified, and as we said before, I think one of the key things is you're looking for a point of difference with the player, Gavin, when you guys identify him. So, if we look at Ben in this case, you're looking at that fact that he was a very good ball carrier at schoolboy age. Also has a strong ball transfer skill set. Again, he's strong in the tackle. Whereas his wow moments come on his ball carry. I suppose the big thing for us is we're monitoring that all the time, and just before, when we move to the next slide, you'll see just a small aspect of that. But we're monitoring that all the time, because we obviously are trying to produce a player who, through the development process, will potentially, hopefully, be better than the players we presently have in our seniors. And that might not be, might be just better at one or two attributes to bring a different point when they get there. So, if Ben's as good as a ball carrier as Stuart McCloskey, great, because we know that Stuart's an excellent ball carrier. But, we also know that, not saying that Stuart can't, but we also know Ben has an exceptionally strong ball transfer ability as well. So his wow factor, his X factor, he's almost coming with two opportunities there to potentially be better than a senior player we already have, who's within our system. So with that, all the time though, that's been, once he's identified through the development process, we will be looking, the key thing, to really enhance his super strength, and then to build the other strengths up to a point where they allow that super strength to shine, but they don't debilitate his game in any way. So they won't necessarily. So for instance, Ben's he's a left foot kicker as well. His left foot kicking is pretty good. Is it as good as ball carrying and ball transfer? No, but can it be at a level which will be good at pro level and allow him to use it as another different weapon or point of difference when he gets there? Also, it's important that it doesn't inhibit him in any way from performing at that level. So we all know now that there's extra demand on centres to play as a second receiver, to deliver tactical kicks, particularly as we just talked about the way defences are getting set up, as he may need a kick to give us territory or to trap a 15 in the backfield. So again, what are we looking at there? We're looking at opportunities to get ahead of the game too. So what can Ben deliver, which will move this player ahead of the game for when he arrives at that level? Where does that also come from? We do have kept a lot of data and a lot of information on the players already who are ahead of Ben, Hayden in this case, James and Stuart's. We have history to look back as well to look at how did they perform at Ben's age. Were they as good or better than Ben at that age? What was their skill set like at that age, and the different things we just talked about, ball transfer, tackle technique, and we're able to ensure then, are we moving Ben beyond that point after his identification so he has that possibility to be better, or do we need to do a little bit more with him? Because as we said before, performance is what maintains these guys too in the pathway. So Ben has to be moving along in each of those aspects.
Good. I think maybe, Kieran, the next slide is just a really good example of suppose how you would track that progress, against maybe one of the key performance indicators, if we want to call it that, and just what that would look like in terms of Ben be compared to people within the pathway, etc. If you want to give us a little bit of an idea of what that involves.
Yeah, so obviously the first thing to say here is that because Ben is playing at a lesser level, he's at school level at the moment, we would expect his stats, and this we're looking at here is one of his main wow moments, if you like. It's his ball carrying and his collision winning. So what we're saying here is that Ben should have elevated stats to Hayden Hyde, for instance, who's playing at Irish 20s and Celtic Cup A level. The positional standards there comes from a history of looking at previous academy players and how they've performed. So thankfully, in this case, Hayden is slightly ahead of that as a first-year entrant last year, and then we'd expect or hope that we can use this history and facets of these guys' games that we've studied to help Ben be slightly ahead of Hayden. The other thing I think with that as well is the stats obviously then at this stage have been compared against history of academy players, because Ben's only just coming in as year one to the academy level. In time will then begin to, so as Hayden moves through the pathway, for instance, they'll begin to be compared with a James Hume or Stuart McCloskey, also because they start to play at a level of game which is reflective of those guys' levels, so high-end Celtic Cup into bottom-end Pro 14.
No, that's excellent, Kieran. I think, I know you guys have spoken about, having those, consistent checkpoints, and comparison points around the players' development and being able to share that information with them. And I think maybe the next slide is something you alluded to previously, just as around, how you use that information to, first of all, identify the areas that, the player requires in terms of improving their performance to progress to the next level. But also, would like to discuss really around the importance you guys place in the super strengths. I think, that's a really strong message that, there's areas, that young players are going to have to develop on as well, but how you really try and focus on making those players have a point of difference with the strengths they may have within their game as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a reason the guy is being selected too. We don't always hone in on what he's not good at, or what he's a little bit needs support. And with all our players, where we start from the first point we start from, and like every coach is a magpie thing. It's stolen from Wayne Smith. Is to focus on what's the guy good at first, and for him to understand that too, because a lot of our young guys who, when we first identify them and you ask them, what do you think you're good at, they find it very difficult to tell us or have real, and one of the big things if you're going to get to the next level and sustain a career there, is you need to have confidence in your ability. You need to feel that there's an aspect of your game which is bringing a point of difference to the team and will deliver those big moments and big plays. So, we feel it's important too, because that's why the guy is picked. That's why he's going to get to the next level. So we hone in on that first, because that's always got to stay at a really high level for that guy to succeed and sustain a career. As I said, the other things that we then focus on, which we know is slightly deficient in, is to make sure that those super strengths can always shine. I think that's it's an important message. It's a starting point we try to start with all players, even as an integrated service team. It's what's going to create top end performance for this guy. So we need to know what he's good at first and deliver on that for him first. Before, as an integrated staff team, we start looking at the other aspects of his game. And that's as we've just alluded to there as well, is a mantra. Is it's not just about getting to the next level. It's performing and achieving at the next level. One of the things we always reiterate is how do we make this guy give him the foundation and the ability to perform, not just get there, perform. I think it's on the slide there, is that's why he needs to excel in his super strengths if he's going to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a really important message there, Kieran. And I think even to suppose thinking of some of my past roles when you're involved in club coaching and even some stuff at college is we are very good at providing the regular feedback to players in terms of the areas we want them to work on. But I even think how often as a school or club coach are we making our players consistently aware of the areas that they're really, really good at and the areas that we see they're excelling in. I think there's a really good message there. Hopefully it comes out from that.
But just on that as well, Gavin, sorry, is and I know some people may be looking at that, but there's a balance to that. We're not telling them ultimately to ignore what they need to perform to improve in, or what the integrated service team needs to work with them on. But I think one of the things is the challenges now of the pro game is a player needs to be confident too, to be robust there. There's a lot of different strains now at the top level, a lot of opportunities for confidence to be I wouldn't say undermined, but knocked. So that the guys need to have the support, so they bring a level of robustness too, and that robustness doesn't come in just I suppose when some of us were coming through, Gavin, and we're both greying now. We were kind of taught that to be hardened up, and that was kind of the thought. But I think there is a point where you can teach these guys to be tough and give them support to be tough and deliver things which are tough. But I think on the other aspect of it is robustness comes in other ways too, and you need to give them an opportunity to deliver a mindset which does have a level of confidence in their ability to survive the pro game now.
Good. Okay, Kieran, I think one of the things you touched on there was just suppose how you move towards that multidisciplinary approach, and probably it'd be interesting probably for some of our attendees just to get a feel for what that interaction looks like. It's not just from a rugby development point of view. There's athletic development things, performance analysis, medical, etc. And I think the next slide starts to demonstrate what those relationships look like. And for me, probably the thing that stood out is just some of the common language you've highlighted across those departments. So maybe if you want to give us a feel, Kieran, initially for for what that level of interaction might look like on a weekly basis, and how you would sort of piece that together in terms of bringing those departments together, and then maybe just explore a little bit around some of those key terms, perform, robustness, etc., and why those might be important.
Well, you've attended a lot of those meetings too, Gavin, and this is the importance of a joined up approach. Is even from making sure that you guys are happy with where these guys are moving to once they're identified. So within that, as you see there's different service teams within our support to a player. The important thing for us is each player is seen as an individual, and there'll be although rugby is a team sport 100%, we do treat each player as an individual to make sure we maximize their potential. One of the common languages you'll see there, one of the big things for us, and this is driven from top down and our connections with Dan and the senior team too, and I know Gavin all the way down to you, is robust performance. And as I said, robustness comes in different forms. But I always go back to stories of the past and ex-pros who've been in as well. I remember Tommy Bowe addressing the boys, and one of the guys asked him, what's one of your main super strengths, Tommy? And Tommy actually was honest enough to say, well, one of my main ones was just being available. Available for selection all the time, available to improve all the time, available to be at training all the time or go to video sessions. So I think robust performance is one of the common language, and the big thing here too is that it's always from the pitch out. So what are we doing to maximize the player's potential on the pitch? So although we have different integrated teams here working together, everyone is fully aligned to its robust performance and how are we from the pitch out working with this player. So what do we need to do within each facet that develops the player to be the best he can be on the pitch? And that will come then at different levels, as you've been in those meetings, Gavin. Is sometimes rugby is very, very important, as it is always the main thing, and that will be the focus of the conversation. But you could take other players who you would know at times where it may be that the main focus of attention needs to come from our performance psychology department or from our athletic development department, because at that point within their development, they're the key holder to where this guy is going next. And that could be also based, if you take Ben, for example, here, it could be that, okay, his X factor is his ball carrying, brilliant, but he needs to develop a little bit more explosiveness. So therefore, at this point in time, the athletic department take the lead on that, and they're the most important people when we come back each week to feedback on these players. They might be the core people who feedback that week, or quarterly when we get to the quarterly meeting. Is it could be that the performance psychologist has had to do a lot of work with Ben on his robustness. So they'll take the main lead and lead that part of the discussion on Ben. So as I said, and as we've said all along, I think from the very start of this, no one has the utopia answers for developing players. We identify a player and there's different means with which to bring that player through. I think one of the big things that we're all learning through time through this process is it has to be player centered. It has to be very much individual. You have to make sure that the core purpose stays at its center, which is the rugby, but at different times, due to the individual nature of this development, different parts of the service team have to take the lead. And as long as they always respect, though, that the key thing is rugby robust performance. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an insight into how that takes place. Again, it's all very well that we've identified this player and he's got to this point, and in Ben's case to the academy. But I suppose that level of profiling of the player never stops until he actually gets out onto the first team pitch. So all these guys here, as you see on this slide, have an integral part to play in that.
Good. No, I think that's great, Kieran. And I think, just some things stood out for me there is really around the player-centered approach, and those, suppose, discussions you're having around those individuals in terms of what that player's needs are at this specific moment in time. And as you say, there may be a greater emphasis at different periods over the course of suppose that player's development, where you may have to put a little bit more emphasis and support around those various aspects. Just in the next slide, Kieran, we're sort of moving on maybe to just, I guess, some of the work that you guys would do, particularly with that academy group on a weekly basis. And just maybe if you want to explain to our audience around the sort of squeeze every drop mentality, and suppose how you're starting to place a little bit more focus on the player taking responsibility for their development, and sort of how that maybe transpires on what you guys have got up on the whiteboard there, and give us a little bit of sort of thoughts around that approach.
Yeah, actually a really good question pre the meeting today. Was asking how that culture comes into it, and how is it intertwined into a player's development as well. And it is becoming a seismic aspect of the job too. I think it's no surprise to anyone. Squeeze every drop. It's not my mantra. It's an organisation mantra which has been driven by Dan. And Dan, I think, has used that really effectively with the players and with the staff team. The idea behind this comes back, everything's centered back to how do we get the best out of this individual to reach their potential. So squeeze every drop out of them, and they squeeze every drop out of themselves. The other idea around it is back to that, as we said, there's different levels of, or different aspects of robustness. So this is also part of them being robust. So the squeeze every drop plan is the idea behind it is that's one of our main cultural pillars in the organisation, top to bottom. The second thing is, not only is it a culture aspect, but how we run this is so guys on this board here are from our sub academy and academy at this time. They get a 3.6% stake of the academy. They own that. That's theirs. They own it in respect of treating their own development, but also how they work within the environment. And each week they have to record where they're at with as you see there, their superpower, their super strength, what they feel they need to develop, and what's their action plan. So they're making it explicit that this is how they're taking control of their development. This is how they're honouring the culture of the organisation. And this is how they're going to respect and work within the environment. So that comes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier about attitude, and where it's built to at academy level, from you identifying them, Gavin, to coming to us, is now they are under, this is a different type of level, what we call capacity of the player. So not only are we examining here their character and their grit, but we're also examining here their level of desire to want to improve, their level to want to learn. How are they learning? How they're taking ownership of their learning? All very important, obviously, for when they get up to the seniors, because these crutches start to disappear as they're expected to perform in big Pro 14 games or European Cup games on the weekend. Senior coaches don't have time to wait for them to be on point and ready to go. They can support them, but the guys need to know how they're going to deliver the ownership of their performance on their weekend. And this is about creating that. And the other thing it creates too is competition and peer responsibility, because each of these players know is they've got to honour their percentage stake within the academy that they own, but they've also got to make sure they support each other. And what it does bring is a little bit of peer pressure, because as you see there, I suppose this is the little bit of the fun element of it as well, which the guys do enjoy. And like all young guys, they quite enjoy having a chance to discipline the losing group.
Yeah,
so that brings up some interesting finds. But I think importantly, what it does is, as you said there, Gavin, it delivers a level of, I think in this case, mental robustness and taking ownership of their development, and also driving the culture and where the academy is going. All things which are going to be important to them when they move up to the next stage. So yeah, I think that nicely connects to, Gavin, where you were talking about attitude of the player when you identify them at 15, 16 to come in. We're assessing this all the way along then, and then it's got to come to a different level when it gets towards here, because they're very close to being out on the pitch at Kingspan every week. In fact, there's probably a couple of guys on that board there who have been. So it's an important part of the process. But I think it's something which has, as we said, about moving ahead of the game and trying to beat. I suppose one of the things, Aidan McNulty, who's come in to work with us from Newcastle Falcons in our academy, he talks about beating the game. So I think this is another aspect of us trying to beat the game, get ahead of the game, so that these guys, when they arrive, are able to deliver a point of difference within the senior environment. Time will tell whether that's successful, but so far I think it's engineering a different type of player who's coming out of our academy.
No, absolutely, Kieran. I think that's great. Around the individual responsibility the player has to get better, but also then, as you've alluded to there, the responsibility towards your peer group in terms of the three guys we're working with, and then suppose the connection with the wider organisation as well, and their part to play in that as well. Just think, Kieran, if we move on, I know the next slide, suppose, starts to demonstrate a little bit around how the number of stakeholders increase, suppose, as a player goes in that journey from mini rugby through to being a potential senior international, really. And it'd be interested just to, suppose, for you to give us an overview of what those lines of communication looks like, where the points of influence come, and maybe how you work, particularly with the IRFU, and then maybe how you work back with the club or school in terms of some of that individual development as well.
Look, it's probably, as you know, Gavin, it's probably one of our key components of our work, and probably one of the most important parts to the success of the player. How does that work? So we're obviously supported and directed from the RFU. So particularly when it comes to identifying players, as we said, those NTS players who are one of the key pillars in our development pathway, is how do we work with them across our integrated service team to make sure the player is getting the best support he can, but also how we're going to get them towards national jerseys. So that they have a big effect, because obviously they have a certain amount of time and contact time with that player within the program during national camps, but also along their journey as we try to develop them in their environment too, or our shared space with them, if you want to look at this as a shared space of development, and trying to get those guys to deliver to their potential. The other key stakeholder, and I think we're all aware of this, is, as you can see there with Jacob's jigsaw, is all the way to even up into to high level academy, into early senior. The clubs and school has a huge effect in their environment and how the player is developed. And we're very fortunate here. Our schools and clubs have bought into us and work heavily with us, be it on our summer program when we had those wider squads in, and guys are working through to achieve recognition for Ulster, or NTS program, where guys have to have a significant amount of time with us, particularly between September and December, on their development, and spend a lot of time in our environment being developed. We share a lot of video footage with clubs and schools. We do a lot of that analysis and on players to share back with the club and school coach to help with the players' development. We share information on sports science through our athletic development department, nutrition. We're very careful in terms of also making sure these players have a balance. It's important to us that they achieve in their academics too, if that's what they want to do, or if they're moving towards a trade. So that's a really shared space environment, and those connections with our stakeholders are hugely important with us. And I suppose that's built from the very beginning of that age grade, Gavin, where you're working with them on those forums to make sure we're initially getting the players who are of the requisite quality to come through or move into different aspects of the game. But also then, as we're working through their development at that NTS Academy level, is we have a very strong connection with them and share that development space effectively with them across those integrated service teams into those environments as well.